So a little bit about Eugenie Scott. She received her PhD in physical anthropology and taught in the university setting for 10 years at the University of Kentucky and the University of Colorado Boulder before becoming the executive director of the National Center for Science Education, which is based in the Bay Area. And NCSE is totally dedicated to focusing on science education, and they support educators around controversial science issues like evolution and most recently climate change. She's received numerous recognition for NCSE activities, including awards from scientific societies, educational organizations, and humanist groups. One of her most recent recognition was the Public Service Medal from the National Academy of Sciences, as well as the Fellows Medal from the California Academy of Sciences. She holds numerous doctorate degrees and is the author of several books, and we're really thrilled to have Genie here to talk a little bit about NCSE's work and how she can support you in addressing climate change in the classroom and what she's learned through working over several decades in the evolution controversy. So please join me in welcoming Genie Scott. Sure.
Good morning. I noticed sitting in back that it was a little bit hard to hear John Abraham this morning, so I'm going to be pretty obedient to the microphone here so that everybody can hear me. As Nicole said, NCSE is an organization that works to try to help teachers deal with the controversial issues of evolution, and very recently we've added global warming to our portfolio, so to speak. We're a very odd organization. We're this sort of strange hybrid of a scholarly organization as well as an activist organization. And what we've done since our inception, a couple of decades ago, is to work at the grassroots level to help teachers and school boards and state legislators and clergy and members of the general public, parents, anybody who is trying to keep good science into the schools and keep the compromising of science education out, shall we say. We cut our teeth, so to speak, on the creationism and evolution controversy, where our concentration was to defend the teaching of evolution, which is still under attack. Trying to keep religious views masquerading as science, such as creation science and intelligent design, from having a place in the science classroom. Obviously, it's important for students to learn about religion, but religion should not be advocated in public schools, and it definitely should not be advocated in the science classes. So we began as an organization and continue as an organization that tries to help teachers, particularly at the grassroots. Some of you may have heard about the Kitzmiller versus Dover intelligent design trial. We advised the plaintiff's legal team on that case, and that's one where we got a great deal of public and national and press recognition. Most of what we do, however, is totally in the background. We don't usually seek a public position when we're advising citizens who are trying to persuade a school board not to pass a policy that's going to hurt science education. We'll provide those parents and those teachers with the information that they need to deal with the science issues or the religious issues or the legal issues. We'll help them with the very practical things like, how do you make an effective presentation to your school board? How do you write an effective letter to the editor? Bullet point, it is not 7 paragraphs long. Okay, little things that maybe you might not have thought about so much, but we've had a lot of experience with, and we can help you. So most of the time we are in the background, and a great deal of our work has to do with individual teachers, such as yourselves, who just call us up or send us an email. You know, I've got a colleague down the hall who's telling his kids in chemistry, why is it always the chemistry teachers? I don't know. Was telling his chemistry students that evolution is a lot of bunk, or is telling his students in history. Sometimes it comes from other parts of the discipline as well. Telling his students in history that climate change is a hoax. What do I do about this? So we do a lot of that individual counseling for teachers as well. And obviously this is something that never makes the press. This is always behind the scenes. So we do a lot, most of it below the surface of the iceberg, so to speak, to try to help teachers to teach good science. Recently, we added climate change to our list of subjects that we help teachers with, which is a short list. Teaching evolution, teaching the nature of science, and now teaching climate science, climate change. You know, like the frying pan wasn't hot enough, we decided we had to add climate change to our portfolio, so to speak. And this came about through a sequence of events that took place over a year, really. A few years ago, we began to notice that anti-evolution was being bundled with anti-global warming in legislation around the country. Also being bundled were things like origin of life and stem cells and human cloning. You know, like human cloning is a really popular topic in high school biology. You all do it in laboratories, I'm sure. Come on, kids, let's go down and clone Mr. Johnson. You know, this just is not a big issue, but it is a big issue to people of certain political and religious persuasions. So they've bundled the controversial issues in one piece of legislation, so to speak. They're called academic freedom laws. And there have been about 40 of these so-called academic freedom bills passed over the last half a dozen years or so, since about 2004 is when they started coming on. They're very clever bills in that they don't mention religion, even though they're, you know, fundamentally anti-evolution bills. They mention things like critical thinking, and they mention things like teaching the strengths and weaknesses of a scientific field. Or they talk about teacher academic freedom to teach alternative views. So they're phrased in very attractive language. But if you know the history of these bills, they really are the latest in a series of evolution, if you will, of anti-evolution, anti-science bills. And we have a lot of information on these bills on our website, which is ncsc.com. Now, there have been about 40 of these bills. Only 2 of them have passed. That's too many, unfortunately. Louisiana and Tennessee have passed these academic freedom bills. The Louisiana teachers complained when this bill was proposed in 2008. The Tennessee teachers complained very vigorously in this last, 2011 and 2012 when the Tennessee bill was being debated. These are not bills that teachers want. These are not bills that scientists want. These are bills that politicians want, because they assuage some of the concerns of certain parts of the voting constituency. They don't improve science education. Teachers are being asked to present standard science in evolution or standard science in climate change, and then the alternative view, which is that evolution is bad science or climate science is bad science, which of course is just bad science education. But these academic freedom bills are worded the way they are to try to avoid the challenges which have been very successful up until now against anti-evolution bills, where you can invoke the First Amendment if they mention religion. You know, public schools should be religiously neutral. You should neither be advancing religion nor criticizing religion. You should be, teachers are, in general, religiously neutral. If you teach that creation science, which is an oxymoron, is valid science, you are advancing religion according to the courts. And so the anti-evolutionists have become very clever in rewording these bills. Like I say, it's been a whole evolutionary process to try to avoid the First Amendment challenges that they have, that have knocked down all of these bills up until now. Now, usually these academic freedom bills die in committee. They're proposed, wiser heads prevail in the legislature, so to speak, and these bills don't pass. They don't get to the floor. This is not by accident. It's because citizens, often, usually, supported by us and other organizations within the state, will call up the legislators, will go to the committee meetings and testify. The reason why these bills fail is because individuals care enough to go and stand up for good science education, and we all should be very grateful to them. Unfortunately, as I say, 2 of these bills did pass, and I fear very much that there will be more of these bills in the future. Once the new legislative season begins next January, we fully anticipate a large number of other states instituting these bills. So do keep an eye out and check our website for further information. Now, this got us thinking about the similarities between anti-evolution and anti-climate change education. And we, being systematically oriented in our thinking, and a lot of us being biologists, we started looking at the ecosystems, shall we say, of denial, of both evolution denial as well as global warming denial. We started doing this partly because we began hearing from scientists who do workshops for teachers around the country, and also from some teachers, that they were receiving pushback for the teaching of climate science. Would they mention global warming, and a kid says, I heard on Fox News that global warming is a hoax, or another kid says, teacher, my daddy says that global warming is bad science. I see some nods out there. Some of you have had these experiences. So we began to think, well, gee, maybe the same sort of thing is happening with global warming as is happening with, has been happening with evolution. And of course, the 40 bills that have been passed around don't occur in a vacuum. That sort of indicates a certain amount of grassroots support for these ideas as well. So we started to think about, well, how do teachers deal with these kinds of problems? Well, okay, so if you want to have a scientific analysis of the creationist arguments, you can go to Panda's Thumb, you can go to Talk Origins, there's a number of websites that you can go to get that sort of information. If you want to have a scientific analysis of the criticisms, so-called, of global warming, you can go to realclimate.org. That's a site written by scientists that's very good, authoritative responses to the global warming denier comments. If you want rebuttals to the creationists, creationist arguments, you can go to Talk Origins. You can go to the oft-mentioned skepticalscience.com. It's really, really a very good site. If you are interested in legal aspects, in lobbying, there's the ACLU, there's Americans United for Separation of Church and State. You have the civil liberties organizations that are defending the Establishment Clause in the First Amendment. There are many environmental groups that are handling the legal and lobbying aspects of the global warming deniers. If you want to have some information about how to teach evolution better, there's the wonderful UC Museum of Paleontology site, Understanding Evolution. Gets 1 million hits a month. It's extremely popular dealing with teaching evolution. And as you have learned in this workshop, and will learn more, there are a number of websites that provide information and lessons that teachers can use for teaching global warming. Things like CLEAN, and then of course the various sites like NOAA and NASA, government-related sites, Energy Department, that have lots and lots of resources to help teachers. If you want to have some sort of help in combating the bad educational content. If you want to have that sort of grassroots support, well, for evolution, there's been NCSE. And teachers and parents have come to us for many years. And there was nothing over here in the global warming cell, so to speak, nothing filling that eco-niche. We talked to the science organizations, and we talked to the National Academy of Sciences, AAAS, AIBS, AGU, GSA. We talked to the science organizations. Have you heard that teachers are receiving pushback? Yes, we have. Are you doing anything about it? No, we kind of don't do that. That's not what we're good at. Why don't you do it? We talked to the science teacher organizations. We talked to NSTA, NABT, the geology teacher organizations, NESTA, NAGT. Are you guys doing any, have you heard that there is pushback? Yes, we've heard that there's pushback. Are you guys doing anything about it? No, we don't really do that. We do these other important things. Why don't you guys do it? Because you're good at it. We talk to the environmental organizations. We talk to the Sierra Club, CDF. We talk to some of the big guys. And have you heard, well, it's not really in our, we don't really do much in the way of science education, but yeah, we think this is an important issue. Are you doing anything about it? No, that's not our purview. We do something else. It needs to be done. So that's why we decided that we would fill that particular ecological niche. So we are here to try to help people like yourselves, the parents in your communities who want to support climate change education in a slightly different way than, say, the Steger Foundation or NAGT or NABT, who are supporting you in different ways. We can help provide you with that information and advice if you are challenged in the teaching of global warming and or evolution. So let me just very quickly suggest some of the problems that teachers have faced, and very, very quickly, because we don't have an awful lot of time this morning, and I do want to leave time for questions, some of the things that we think might be useful for you in dealing with challenges to the teaching of global warming. Now, in our dealing with the evolution issue for several decades here, we have found that there's basically three categories of arguments that the creationist position can fall into. So any book or letter to the editor or conversation you might have with an anti-evolutionist tends to fall into one of these three patterns, and we call them the pillars of creationism. It turns out that that same general structure also applies to global warming denial, and that was one of the things that really surprised us when we started looking into the problems that teachers were having in teaching global warming. And so let me just very quickly talk with you about the pillars of global warming denial. The first pillar is that the claim that anthropogenic, human-caused global warming is weak science. The idea that scientists are in great dispute about the reality, the evidence for global warming, and that the jury is still out on this issue. Well, as John Abraham showed this morning, there are so many independent multiple lines of evidence pointing to the well-established conclusion that the planet is getting warmer and that people's activities have a lot to do with this. That, scientists just it's sort of facepalm time when they hear these claims that anthropogenic global warming is somehow weak science or unsubstantiated. This is a technique that is found, of course, in the anti-evolution movement, but it goes back much further than that. You can trace this technique of attacking the science, claiming that there is not yet a scientific consensus when there actually is. You can trace this all the way back to the anti-smoking campaigns of the 1950s and 60s, where the tobacco companies claimed that the jury was still out on whether tobacco smoking was harmful to you. Some of us with gray hair remember those days. And you can, if you're interested in this, you can read a very interesting book by Conway and Oreskes called Merchants of Doubt, where she traces back this kind of tactic of challenging the science by a number of factors, one of which is to sort of bring in some tame scientists who hold your position and then claim that their positions are as valid as the vast majority of scientists who accept that, nicotine is addictive, tobacco smoke is injurious to your health, and the planet is getting warmer and people have a lot to do with it. So attacking the science is a tried and true technique of people who want to, who have an axe to grind. As John Abraham said, 97% of actively researching climate science, scientists who are active climate science researchers agree the planet's getting warmer, people have a lot to do with it. If you look at scientists as a whole, a study done by the Pew Foundation in 2009 of AAAS members, American Association for the Advancement of Science members, showed that the percentage was in the low 90s of scientists across the board. So, I mean, you can hardly get scientists to agree that the sun's going to come up tomorrow. So, you know, when you get over 90% of them agreeing on something, I think you can pretty safely conclude that that idea is part of the scientific consensus. So, attacking the science is something that you're going to run into. Kids will bring in literature, or if you talk about global warming, sometimes a parent will complain and request or demand, sometimes they don't request, they're a little tougher than that, that you show a video, say, that's produced by some climate science denier organization. And it'll all have to do with challenging the validity of the science. Now, we've got some suggestions for how you can deal with this. I would discourage you from actively debating these things in the classroom with students. Part of this is what we fondly call the Gish Gallop in the evolution realm, but it's the fact that they can just keep coming up, well, okay, you've answered the point about how it's not the sun. You know, as John was saying, if it was the sun, then you wouldn't expect nights to be heating up faster than day. You know, so there's answers to all of these claims that they have. Well, okay, you convinced me that it's not the sun, but what about this other one? You know, they have this big long list, and they'll just wear you out going down it. The site skepticalscience.com is just wonderful. It has the 100 top denier arguments and very clear explanations for why they are not valid scientific critiques. And I really do encourage you to become familiar with at least the top, half dozen or so that you can give a brief response to a student or a parent who comes in to complain. But I would strongly encourage you not to try to get into this tit-for-tat kind of argument. Certainly not during class time. Have the kid come in after school if you like that sort of thing. But refer the student, the parent, the administrator, whatever it is, to skepticalscience.com because the answers will be there. As in evolution, climate science has the high ground. The scientific community is firmly behind the reality that climate change is taking place, people's actions have a lot to do with it. The science education community is firmly behind this. You'll find if you go to NSTA, NABT, the geology associations, they all have statements attesting to the fact that teachers should be able to teach climate science in an unqualified fashion. They shouldn't have to teach it as something that has weaknesses or qualify it in some fashion that would shed doubt in students' minds on the validity of the science. That's just bad pedagogical practice to pretend to kids that things that are not true are true. So you can get a lot of support for this and hold the high ground. We don't have to defend the science of global warming. We've got the National Academy of Sciences. You know, that you can stand behind the authorities, so to speak. The other thing is you can stand behind your state science standards. I don't know enough about the specifics of the Minnesota standards, so I'm saying this sort of generically at this point. But usually there's something in your science standards that encourage the teaching of global warming, some climate change principles, CO2 as a warming gas or whatever. And you can also say, well, sorry, Mrs. Brown, the standards say I have to teach it. It's a very good way to end that conversation because you really don't want to get into a debate with Mrs. Brown, the parent. You really want to just get on with teaching the kids. There are other ways of dealing with the first pillar as well. Second pillar, which is going to show up sooner or later, is an ideological pillar, if you will. The idea that anthropogenic global warming is a political movement of liberals. It's an effort to try to increase big government, to take away our individual freedoms. They're trying to tell us what kind of light bulb to buy. I mean, that light bulb thing was another interesting story. They're trying to restrict our individual freedoms and our prosperity and compromise the defense of the nation. I mean, this is the package of things that are being presented as why global warming isn't true, that it's merely a plot by political opponents to increase big government. There's also an economic ideology that lies at the root of a lot of climate change opposition, global warming opposition. And this is what some have referred to as a free market fundamentalism. The idea that any sort of restriction upon the free market is an attack on capitalism. The free market will solve all of our problems. We merely, we shouldn't put any restraints upon the coal and gas and oil producers. We should just let the free market solve all of the problems. And we know how well that works. This is an ideological position. It's not really based on the science at all. And science is not going to assuage these concerns. John had some very clever ways of dealing with this issue if you kind of listened with one kind of ear to his presentation this morning. You notice that he was talking about saving money. He was talking about generating jobs. He was talking about the military taking... That happens every once in a while, I don't know why. He was talking about the military taking global warming very seriously because they have to plan for population movements and they have to plan for supplies of fuel to run the military equipment, et cetera, et cetera. These are all non-scientific arguments that appeal to people who reject global warming based on this particular political or economic ideology or ideological position. And it needs to be part of the arsenal. I personally just, because I'm that kind of person, I really love to appeal to people's better angels. I love the idea of trying to encourage people to step more lightly on the planet, shall we say, use less energy, etc., because there are many people on this planet who really have barely enough to survive and we use so much, etc., etc. That works with some people. It doesn't work with every people. You need to have a lot of quivers in your, of arrows in your quiver, so to speak. And, somebody like me is, a position like my favorite position is not necessarily going to be persuasive to everyone. And so being able to make these economic and national security kinds of arguments is very helpful. The idea that somehow global warming is a liberal plot to increase big government is, to me, is kind of a crazy meme, especially since there has been such a long tradition within the Republican Party of environmentalism. Right now, those people are kind of hard to find because they're getting drowned out by people with more conservative views. But when you look back, it was Richard Nixon who founded the EPA. And it was Teddy Roosevelt who established the national park systems. And it was Ronald Reagan who did a great deal to expand the national park system. I mean, there is a tradition within the Republican Party of good, sound environmental practices. And there are Republicans who are trying to remind their fellow Republicans of this history. And, you can partly defuse this idea that global warming is a liberal plot by pointing out that science is not a political issue. The science is as it is. And we can use the science to inform our policy decisions, and we should use our science to inform our policy decisions. But those policy decisions are really made for additional reasons beyond those that science can tell us. But the science is accurate and the science needs to be taught. And if you don't like the implications of the science, it is not an intellectually acceptable procedure to just reject the science because you don't like its implications. There are a lot of things in life that are like that. Finally, there's a third pillar of global warming denial, and this is the fairness pillar. The idea that, well, if you teach global warming, there's so many people who think global warming is a hoax that you should really just teach both. And of course, if you go to those climate scientists like John, and the people that he was talking about today. If you go to those climate scientists and you say, what is the list of the evidence against global warming, they'll laugh because there is no list of evidence against global warming. And there's really nothing to teach except a lot of bad science, such as you'll find evaluated in skepticalscience.com. So if you are approached with this argument that we need to have our kids debate climate science as a critical thinking, good pedagogy kind of exercise, that's fine, but turn it so that it serves your purposes. Have them debate topics within climate science that are actually in contention, not debate whether the planet is getting warmer, because that is just bad science. The question of you are being dogmatic if you're only teaching global warming. Well, that's like saying, you know, I'm being dogmatic because I'm only teaching heliocentrism, right? You don't teach geocentrism, that the planets go around the Earth, to balance out heliocentrism, which is that the planets go around the sun. That's not balanced. That's just bad science. That's just silly. Because heliocentrism is the consensus view within astronomy of the planetary positions. If there was a well-funded lobby out there promoting promoting geocentrism, you'd have the same problem. But there isn't one, so the problem is in evolution and global warming. I think your response to your response to parents or administrators who might be leaning on you to not be dogmatic, teach both, is to point out that the job of a K-12 teacher, in most cases middle school, high school, that's where we're talking pretty much, the job of a middle school and high school teacher is to present the consensus view of science to kids. You guys aren't expected to be out there on the bench evaluating the latest theories in science. Your expertise is taking the best of modern science and figuring out how to break it down into steps so that beginning learners can construct an understanding of whatever scientific discipline you're talking about. It's not to be out there deciding between the multiverse and string theory. You know, that's just kind of not part of your job description. You shouldn't have to be expected to do that. So what your job is, and this is a technique that you can use if you are challenged for being dogmatic or, you know, being closed-minded about not bringing in the denier arguments. You can just point out, my job as a teacher is to give your kid the consensus view of science. Now, if the deniers, if the people who deny that global warming is valid science want to make their point, they should make it to the university professors. And if they convince the university professors, it'll trickle down into high school, and I'll be happy to teach it. But right now, the consensus view is that the planet's getting warmer, and and human beings have a lot to do with it. And so, Mrs. Brown, that's what I'm going to teach. And you know, you can explain this to a teacher, you can explain this to an administrator. And this is the kind of good pedagogy that should be taking place in the classroom. In other words, kick it upstairs. You shouldn't have to fight these battles. The university professors are supposed to be arguing these things out, not the high school teachers. And we sure as hell don't need 7th graders deciding between, you know, whether it's the sun or whether it's greenhouse gases. I mean, no, they need to be learning the consensus view of science. Okay, more information can be found at ncsc.com. We have a new climate science section of our website. Obviously, the majority of the website is still on evolution because we're still wet behind the ears when it comes to climate science. We've only been doing this for about 6 months. If you go to that button there, you'll be taken to this page, and there's a number of topics over here, which will show up sooner or later, that I hope you will take an opportunity to browse and find out more about. We also are on YouTube. We're also on Facebook. You can check the NCSC sites there and find out more about these 2 issues. So, oh gosh, I was hoping to leave a lot more time for discussion, and I just rambled on. I apologize.